Welcome to Chatting the Pictures. My name is Cara Finnegan, and I'm a writer, teacher, and historian of photography.
And I'm Michael Shaw. I'm a writer, a psychologist, and also publisher of Reading the Pictures.
Our first segment we call The News, and here we're interested in how news photos tell a story.
This picture was taken by freelance photographer Angus Mordant. It's from last Sunday, May 10th, 2020. The photo was taken at a small pocket park called St. Vincent's Triangle in downtown Manhattan, across the street from the Lennox Health Greenwich Village Hospital. Refrigerated trailers being used as overflow morgues have become part of the New York landscape. And ironically, the park is also the site of the official New York City AIDS Memorial.
Not only do you have that public collective memory of AIDS, but you have in the background this very contemporary presence or hint of death and disease in the present space, right? This kind of ad hoc morgue that's represented by these refrigerated trucks. Is it an image of whistling past the graveyard? It certainly condenses all the different ways that people are and aren't social distancing right now, doesn't it?
It really does. And it reminds me a lot of the photograph that Thomas Hopker took on 9/11, showing the people on the promenade in Brooklyn with the smoldering World Trade Center in the background. And in that case, because of the dynamics of the photograph, Hopker didn't release the photograph for 5 years. It looked like the people were really casual, that they weren't taking this horrific event seriously. And in this particular photo, you wonder why these people aren't mindful of the trailer. But at the same time, it feels like maybe the people in New York are taking life as well as death in stride.
I keep thinking about the famous painting, Sunday on La Grande Jatte, famous painting by Seurat that is in the Chicago Art Institute that features people on an average Sunday in the park. This image is like that, and then certainly not like that in the context of the coronavirus pandemic. The comparison to me is that each of these groups or even individuals are kind of in their own universe, even as they're all gathered together in what you've said is a very small space. And that really is kind of the modus operandi of big city living. Everyone is kind of self-contained in their groups, more or less social distance, some in masks, some not in masks, doing their thing in a context where regular life is extremely disrupted.
You don't get the sense of relief or mundanity in a picture like this when people have been so pent up and are so in need of some fresh air. You know, we talk about the new normal. It's like a picture of the new normal right now. What's been in the news the last couple of days is how critical the mask itself is in terms of a preventative measure. So if there's anything distressing about this photograph, it's not that people are chilling in the foreground of a refrigerated container holding people that have died of the virus, but the fact that there's so many people in this photograph that are not covering their faces with masks.
I can't stop looking at the nearly naked guy lying down, absorbing the sun in that little tiny patch of grass in the middle of the photograph. I think there's two things there. One is it's hard not to think about him as a kind of visual analog for people who have died, who might be in that truck behind him. They're both on that horizontal plane, if you will. But the second is, and this gets to something you talked about earlier with people's need to get out, and that is, you know, if you look at the way people are dressed, they're in long sleeves and jackets. And this guy clearly came with a lawn chair, which I think is right behind him. And there was a coat there and he shed it all and he's laying on the grass. He took his shirt off and he's got bare feet. And to me, that's just kind of embodies that desire of, I want it to be warm. I want to lie in the sun. I want things to be different, even though it's actually really cold outside and pretty unsafe. To a certain extent, to me, this is also an image just about everyday understandable desires. Our next segment we call The Look, and here we're interested in how photographs can push the visual boundaries to illuminate a story or an idea.
This photograph was taken by Isadora Kozovsky for the New York Times. In the photo, the Botiz family reacts to seeing 82-year-old Beatrice Botiz through the doorway at Alexandria Care Center in Los Angeles on Mother's Day this past Sunday. Each family had a scheduled time, and every 30 minutes a new line would form. Following social distancing guidelines, each family waited for the previous family to finish before their own relative was brought into view. Beatrice has lived in the center for 8 months, and the Alexandra Center itself has been locked down since March 12th. It has reported 19 current cases of COVID. Those people who are stricken or housed in a separate unit. 2 residents have died of the disease.
I'm really struck by the contrast of the festive balloons, the Mother's Day balloons in all the happy pink and yellow and orange colors in the middle of the image. And kind of then following that down diagonally to the lower right, that orange warning sign, which calls your attention to all the other signage on the door of this facility. Stop, no visitors allowed, written in multiple languages. That correspondence between the happy celebratory Mylar balloons and those warning signs, I think encapsulates what's happening with the people in the image.
Yeah, there's a lot of things about this photograph that are really difficult to look at, and I think that they're just particular to the center. I looked at some other photographs of the entrance, and it's pretty wide. If all those warnings weren't on the window, you would actually be able to see and perhaps even line up horizontally instead of vertically. That's not just a little weird, but it's also a little bit painful. You know, it makes me feel bad to see this family have to actually form a line and take turns to see their loved one.
And when you look at the bodies, there's so much physical and definitely emotional reaching, isn't there? You've got what look like the 2 women in the front. Presumably, they've seen their loved one. They're reaching in and waving at that person that we can't see. But you have the men in the left of the image leaning. You see other hands waving in. These are people who, like many, many people, have a loved one that they cannot be physically with. And they're just literally reaching for any opportunity that they can in the moment of this crisis. That kind of reaching and leaning that the family's doing, I think they sort of bring the viewer along with that in a way, particularly given the demographics of how COVID-19 has affected people in the United States. The fact that we're looking primarily here at an African-American family, I think is even more poignant. Our next segment we call The Pick, and here we're interested in what makes a news photo a good choice among many options.
This photograph was made by Athit Perwang-Metha for Reuters. It was shot on May 8th, and it shows people having lunch at the Penguin Eat Shabu Hot Pot restaurant after it reopened in Bangkok, Thailand.
That theme together alone has been bandied about a lot rhetorically since this pandemic began. And boy, this is really an image of that, right? And an image that really forces you to spend some time looking and understanding and comprehending and thinking about what together alone might mean in this context.
One thing the photo brings up that we haven't really discussed very much is why a particular photograph seems to be everywhere when there's so many photographs that detail the same thing. So this photograph appeared so many places, and I'm kind of wondering why you think that's so.
That's such a good question. I think partly it really forces your eye to work. We're used to seeing images of masks. We're used to looking at images that either do or don't represent quote unquote proper social distancing practices. But here, you really have to work to figure out if these people are actually safe, according to what your understanding of that would be in this kind of a context. You have to follow the lines on the floor. You have to follow those screens very ad hoc with plastic and what looks like PVC pipe separating individuals so that they can sit at the same table, but they're protected from one another. It's a photo where you really have to work. And I think by extension, the photo depicts how we all really have to work to truly think about what it might mean to be reopened, to be particularly in public spaces, in close quarters with other people, in an era where we don't have a vaccine. And in the United States, we don't have a whole lot of testing still.
I think this is a really nice photo. It feels very common. It feels very friendly. It feels, again, like very normal. Most of the pictures that I've been seeing from the United States that are showing different establishments opening up or looking at photographs of restaurants that are being modeled or retrofitted, the pictures seem very awkward, or you don't see very many customers in there. And this feels like this can work. This feels like this can be not such a big deal. I think that's very soothing and very reassuring, especially here in the United States where, a lot of this behavior is pretty new.
I feel like I would know what to do if I were there. Like I would know how to sit and where not to sit. I feel like it would be clear. And I think you're right. The photograph gives you literally, because the photographer is higher up, it gives you an overview of what it is that you would need to do if you were in this space.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks. You can find us on Instagram at Reading the Pictures and also Reading the Pics on Twitter. And you can also find us on our site, Reading the Pictures on the web.